So hi there, time for another video tutorial, and this time around we'll be making a cute little scene. It'll be super easy to build and also very fast to render. So let's begin. I'll be using the default cube for our modeling, and I'll hit the tab key to switch from object to edit mode and hit Ctrl tab for the mesh select mode and select face. Now W for the specials menu, and I'll click subdivide. I'll move down here and set the number of cuts from 1 to 2, and I don't know why it changes our select mode now. Control tab again for face select mode, so we have faces now. We want to work with faces, and I'll hit the A key to deselect all. Now I'll move down here and click select and random. Now the random selector, and we can see that it has already selected 50% of the faces on our object. Now I'll hit the extrude individual button here at the tools and extrude my faces a bit. Now hit the A key again to deselect all, and down here select random, and again extrude individual. Let's move them. Now A key again, deselect all, and select random, and extrude individual again. And as you can see, we're having overlapping faces here, but don't worry, because that's exactly what we want. Now A key again to deselect all, down here select random and extrude individual again, extrude them. Now A key to deselect all, and I'll now hit the Z key so we can see our mesh, our object, and that's pretty much what we want. We want a dense object, an object that looks and has some sort of volume. You can see we have overlapping faces, we have edges, and yeah, that's pretty much what we want. Z key again for the solid mode, and let's move down here and select random again, click extrude individual, let's move them. Now A key again to deselect all, once more select random and extrude individual. A key again, select random and extrude individual. As you can see, we're doing the same steps over and over. Now we're at about there. I'll hit the A key to select all, to deselect all, excuse me, and A to select all, and I'll hit the W key and click subdivide. Now our viewport is getting slower because, as you can see, now we have a mesh with lots of faces and vertices, but don't worry, we'll simplify it in a while. Now tab key to switch to object mode, and let's move here at the modifiers panel and let's add a build modifier. Now what the build modifier does is that it builds the object, our object, starting from frame 1 up to frame 100. Now if I set it to 100, now you can see the full object. Okay, now back to 1, and I'll move my, I hit my arrows on my keyboard just to see that we have our object building as frames go by. Now we could also, I'll hit the tab key to go to edit mode again. We could also hit the A key to deselect all and click select random, and let's say select 90% of our faces and click here delete to erase faces to create the desired result, but the build modifier gives us more control, and I'll hit Ctrl Z to undo the face deletion and tab key go back to object mode. So you can see the build modifier is now building our object as I hit the right arrow and move some frames up. I'll also click randomize, and as you can see our mess now looks pretty interesting. I'll now increase the length because the length is pretty much the amount of steps our object will need until it's complete, and if we increase the length value, I'll set it say to 1000, we'll be having more steps to work with. And as you can see right here, we're having some interesting shapes like this one that will probably look good for our animation. Now I'll hit 1 on my numeric keypad and 5 to switch to front overview and take a closer look at my mess, and I'll hit the left arrow to move some steps back. So now I'm having less and less vertices for my object, and what I want to is to have these hollow points here. As you can see here, we have these hollow points where we can see the grid below, and that means that our mess at these points is pretty much hollow. And what we need to do now is select the camera and over here hit Ctrl Alt 0 to snap our camera into view, and 1 again for the front overview. And since our camera and Blender, as every other 3D application, uses a virtual camera, we can pretty much squeeze it everywhere we want, since it's only just a point in space. Now I'll hit the grab key and move it right here. Just make sure that you have a hollow point close to the center. Now our camera is in place. I'll hit the N key and move up to the transformations, and I'll hit this one and this one to lock the Z and X axis, because we'll only be moving our camera in the Y axis. Now 0 to go back to camera perspective view, and let's move our camera in the Y axis, and as you can see we have a pretty interesting mesh to travel through. Now while my camera is selected, I'll go over here at the camera properties and change the focal length from 35 to 15. Oh, that's nice. I'll set up the lights now. Hit 7 on my numeric keypad for the top overview. Let's locate our light right here, and I'll hit the G key to grab it, move it right here. We want it to be back from the camera and illuminating our object, our mesh here, one for front ortho view, and I'll hit the Z key and Z to move it down a bit at about there. And at the light properties here, I'm going to click no shadow. Now 7 again for the top view, and I'll hit Shift D to duplicate my light and move it back. So we now have two lights illuminating our mesh, and let's click our mesh and let's add a material to it. Over here, the material tab, we already have a material assigned. I'll increase the intensity up to 1, bring down the specular from 0.5 to 0, and I'll also add some translucency, and that's the amount of light at the back side of our object. Now you'll see how that looks. 0.4 for translucency, and I'll also add a slight emit value at 0.2. I'll now move on to the texture for our material here. We already have a texture assigned, and I'll just change the type from none to the magic texture. Now the magic texture is rarely used, but it's pretty fine for our example here, because it gives us a set of colors that are placed, at some points, and you'll see it'll look fine for our object here. Now I'll hit 0 to switch back to camera view, and my object is selected, and as you can see here, the build modifier is also active, and we can now hit the left arrow or the right arrow to further fine-tune our object, our mesh, and let's find a point where our mesh looks dense enough and looks good enough, and I think we're at about there. And once you like what you see, select the object and hit apply at the build modifier. Okay, apply. So now our object, even if the frames move on, move up and down, our object will now stay as it is. So let's now change, let's move on to the world settings. I'll change the horizon color from black to white, and I'll do a test render. Render an image. That's what we get, and as you can see, it also renders pretty fast. Now escape key. My mesh is selected, my object is selected, and I'll hit Shift D to create a duplicate of it. You can see it. Right click to cancel any movement for our duplicate, and I'll move right here and change the material for the duplicate object. Now I'll click right here to make a single user copy for this object, and that means that we have a unique material for this object. And over here at the textures, I'll also click single user, and I'll delete the texture. Now back to the material, and this time around we'll be using a wire material. I'll change the diffuse color. Let's make it, let's say, purple. We want it to be a tad dark compared to the other object's material. And I'll also click, let's click shadeless. Now render again, and before I render, I'll do one more thing. I'll hit the tab key, and we have the wire object selected, the copy. I'll hit the tab key and hit the A key to deselect all, and A again to select all, and I'll hit W to subdivide. Now tab key again, go to object mode, and I'll hit F12 to render. So that's what we get. We have the second object, the wire object, appearing as a wireframe. It makes our shapes, nicer and separates them from each other. I'll now add some compositing, some basic compositing for our scene. I'll split this window, switch over to the node view, click here and select node editor, compositing, and use nodes. By clicking use nodes, we have render layers and a compositing node. I'll hit Alt A to add filter, a glare node. Let's connect the glare node, and I'll change it from streaks to fog glow. I'm using the fog glow node because I want, just a fuzzy, dreamy look on our scene. And I'll hit Alt A again, and this time around I'll go over to distort and get a lens distortion node. Now let's connect this one as well, and we'll change the distort value from 0 to 0.1 and the dispersion value from 0 to 0.12. I'll also hit Alt A to add output viewer node so we can see what we're doing. Now I'll hit render again to render an image, and you can see how our image looks after the compositing. Now let's lower the threshold for the fog glow node just until we have some glow. Yep, at about there. So one more thing I'm going to do now is hit the escape key to go back to my viewport, and I'll select the first mesh object, the one with this material right here, and I'll add some transparency. It's set to Z transparency. We could use ray trace right now, but it'll only increase the render times. So let's keep it simple. I'll change the alpha from 1 to 0.7 and hit F12 for another look. So this is it. Let's move on to animation. I'll right click this frame to select my camera and move back to frame 1, and let's move it on the y-axis. Let's move it at about here. Let's set it to 2.5, and I'll now hit the I key while my camera is selected to insert a location rotation keyframe. Now click, and I'll move back to frame 240. Feel free to increase the number of frames because this one renders super fast. You could easily render 600 frames. I'm rendering at 30 frames per second, so you can easily render like 600 frames for 20 seconds or 900 frames for 30 seconds. It'll render very, very fast. Now I'm at frame 240, and let's move our camera to on the y-axis until we see pretty much a good view of our object, and I'll also increase the X rotation value, and let's make our camera look up at the end of the animation at about there. Now I'll hit the I key again to insert a new location rotation keyframe for the final frame. Now let's select the wire object. You can see it in the materials here. We have the wire object, and I'll change here at the object properties. I'll change the display type from texture to wire. Now back to frame 1, and I'll hit Alt A. Take a look at the animation. Looks pretty nice. So this is it. I'll move back to frame 240 just to render an image so you can see it. Pretty nice, colorful, pretty fast to render. And what I've also done, feel free to skip this step if you don't like the result. I've also clicked the stamp right here, so it adds some text with the date, time, render times, frame, scene, etc. I'll change the text color to black, increase the font size, set it to 14 or maybe 16, render again, and you can see this text appearing. Feel free to change the text color. Let's make it, I don't know, orange. But once again, feel free to skip this step. I think that when rendered in the animation it will look nice, and we're pretty much over. I'm going to save this just to render it out so you can see some examples of it. I'm going to call this file let's say mesh, and we're good. So that's the animation. As always, feel free to fiddle with it. It'll be pretty easy to create your own animation in 10 or 15 minutes once you get the hang of it. So that's all, and see you at the next video tutorial.